And then I remember coming out of it, opening my eyes, and I'm like, oh man, am I dead or am I here back on Earth? And instantly for me, everything was different.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Love, Loss, and Hallucinations. Before we get started today, I just want to put out this little disclaimer that this content is for educational and harm reduction purposes only. We do not promote or support illegal activity, the sale or use of restricted substances, or the use of associated tools or accessories. This is not medical advice. We are not doctors, obviously, and you should consult a qualified professional for your health decisions. With that said, I'm really honored to have today's guest. His name is Robert Gallery. If you're a football fan, particularly a Raiders fan, you probably first know him from when the team selected him second overall in the 2004 NFL draft. Or you might know him from his time before that, playing for the University of Iowa, where he earned All-American honors and the 2003 Outland Trophy. All in, Robert played 8 seasons in the NFL as an offensive guard before retiring in 2012 at the age of 32 due to injuries and surgeries. From there, his road took some dark and very challenging turns, which we will be getting into, before his path brought him to plant medicine and eventually co-founding the nonprofit Athletes for Care. And we will definitely be talking about all that as well. It's an incredible story of athletic achievement, coming close to not surviving what came next, but discovering a healing path that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Robert, but it has given you new life and new purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Changed my life and gave me my life back. So yeah, I look forward to talking about it.
Excellent. Yeah. And welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time. I think you're joining us from somewhere in the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas. So I'm sure you'd possibly rather be outside playing, but I appreciate you taking the time to chat here today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate having me on.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I want to start back at that time when you were, retiring from being an offensive guard, and that's a big transition. Yes, you're financially fine and all that sort of thing, but for the last 20 years, and I'm speaking also from my own experience here, being a professional triathlete, and we retired actually about the same age, although I was about a decade sooner than he did. You've this shift from this huge support system, all these players, the teams, the coaches, they're all there supporting you. And then I imagine you walk in, you say, I'm not going to play anymore. And there's got to be a huge shift after that.
Yeah, no, I think it's like you said, anyone that does something for a very long time, when it comes to an end, right, whether you choose or someone else chooses for you, there is a shift in your mind, right? So for me, it was, the lack of identity, that's all I thought about for, 20 years before that, getting into college and, my college career and then my pro career, even before that, that's what you think about, but especially in the pros, and in college, because it's like a full-time job there too. And so when you're done, right, like you said, you lose, I think especially athletes, right, we're very much on the routine, right? You get used to the routine, you know what you have to do day in and day out. Most of us don't like change, right? Because you're not allowed to have it, right? Like, let's just be honest. Like when you're an employee of a professional football team, right? They tell you where to be, when to be there. And if you're not there on time, there's consequences, which is usually financially, right? It's a fine. So it's, when that came to an end, it was right. Because I was used to getting up at 4:30, 5 o'clock, heading in, getting my workout. And then that's over. Right. And then the main thing is the community you had built, in that job. So the locker room, right? We spent hours, 12, 14 hours a day or more in that building. Right. So you're around your buddies, right? The guys you play with, you have this bond, you can, talk about things.
Yeah. There's a camaraderie there.
Yeah. So that locker room's a big deal. So when all that comes to an end, right, you lose all that. And like you said, too, with the support, right? An NFL team, they take care of you. If you need something, you ask, they get it for you. They get you headed in the right direction for what you need. And so, yeah, that was a huge shift. And that's what I thought initially is like, man, I'm not handling this very well. Little did I know that, there were other things going on that were causing some of my ups and downs with the TBI aspect of it. But yeah, just that alone is hard to handle. And that's why, a lot of professionals struggle when they are done.
Yeah. For sure. And, just reflecting on that is from my own experience. And, I was a triathlete, like much less. I mean, we sort of had the people we trained with were our support system, and so that went away. But, in early 2000s, and I would imagine it wasn't probably much different in 2012. I think it's probably gotten better now. But, there wasn't a lot of talk about depression or, these mental shifts and losing identity and, what you've been doing for 20 years that gave you this adulation and what you probably thought was love at the time and attention as well. And, that shift and I think you referenced it, this doesn't even have to be just athletics. It can be, a big job shift. You get fired from a job and suddenly this thing that you've been doing for 20 years, you're no longer that person. So it's a difficult shift. And, certainly, as I said, when I retired and tell me if I'm wrong, when you retired, like, it's not like people are talking about it, right? And you feel like whatever, things kind of suck for whatever reason, but you don't know why. And you think, since you have no reference, that this is probably just normal and I just have to freaking deal with it and I can't really lean on anybody. Does my experience reflect on yours at all in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's right. You don't know how to deal with it, right? You know the emotions of it, and that was a time when people weren't talking about it, right? Not,
Right.
I think the world has changed and people are more open. It's still a long way to go, but people are talking about, depression and the things that what it does to your brain, right? Just the emotional part of what it does to your brain. So all that stuff's being talked about now. But back then it was just, hey, you got to deal with it. And also, in my experience, it's like, am I the only one feeling this, right? Like everybody,
Yeah.
you look at everybody else's situation, right? And nothing's ever good enough for, us individually. So for me, it's like, oh, I didn't play long enough, or I didn't do this, or I didn't get our team to the playoffs, right? And you think you're the only one that thinks that. And, if, and I say that, right? You think during it, I knew, right, this would all end at some point, right? I was very realistic that I knew in professional football, you're not going to play, into your 50s. Most people aren't, right? Like that's,
Yeah, right.
it's just physically not possible. But so
Right.
I thought I was prepared for it, but also you're not, right? Because it's never, that's the other thing about being a competitor. You never did enough. So that was a lot of the struggle too, is like, no, I
Mm-hmm.
should have accomplished this. We should have done that. I should have
Mm.
played 10 years instead of 12. But if I would have played 10, I would have said I should have played 12 instead of 10, right? It's just,
Yeah.
nothing's ever good enough. So yeah, being in that, especially that era, right, in 2012 for me and, early 2000s for you is, yeah, you going through that by yourself. And then you don't want to, right? You don't have anything in common with the guy next door, right? As nice as he is and his job and he's got his own problems, but he won't understand, right? Because again, he looks at
Yeah.
you, especially in our instance, right? Like, oh, you made all this money, you played in the National Football League, all this stuff, like you have no problems. Like, what are you complaining about? So yeah, there's
Mm-hmm.
all those things that I'm better at dealing with now that we just, didn't have guidance on back then.
Yeah. And, along to that point is there's I I can't remember who says it, or maybe it's just a common saying of like, you just never know what someone else is dealing with, and trying to approach people with grace, even if they seem like they're jerks, because you don't know what's going on inside. And, I, I certainly went through a whole thing with depression that, luckily I was able to come up out of. But, in addition to like that identity loss, the depression, you know, you also had some other things going on, which you referenced, which was the TBI and some brain injuries, basically from bashing heads for 20 years and loss of brain matter, even. And I guess just tell the listeners a little bit of that journey and where, I'm assuming, as you said, you didn't realize that when you first retired and like things were happening around the house that maybe you were like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right. And, what was the journey to where you finally realized that, oh, geez, there's more going on than I even knew?
Yeah, for me, it was, even when I was playing, right, you're so entrenched in this is right. It was a great career. You do what
Mm-hmm.
you have to do to continue on in your career. And so did I know playing football would probably have some effect on me? I did. Right.
Yeah.
Physically, mentally, as far as my brain health. But I guess I was tricked myself into thinking, oh, those things won't happen until I'm 60, 70 years old, right? The studies are out that like a lot of guys are getting dementia or having issues, right? Cognitive issues. But in my head, I tricked myself into saying, oh, this will be when I'm older, right? If I make it
Mm.
that long. But as my career ended, right, dealing with the emotional stuff, and then the thing I was aware of was the things that were going on. So it was good and bad because I was aware, right? I would have these triggers. I would get upset. I'd have these rage episodes when, my kids were laughing or messing around.
Mm.
Or my wife would say something and I could just feel, for a better lack of words, the darkness. I could just feel my eyes just go dark, and I knew these things weren't normal feelings, but I didn't understand why they were going on. Right. I'm like, man, I'm just
Right.
messed up. Right. Even to the point where I'm self-diagnosing, like, am I bipolar? What is going on?
Mm.
And then it turned into, the depression and suicidal thoughts and suicidal nightmares and all these things. And so I'm aware of at times what's going on, but I don't understand why it's happening. And so for me, it took, getting a brain scan, which was kind of a fluke deal, right? That it happened at that time.
Yeah.
Because I was going through
And that was many years later, though, right? That was.
yeah, it was 2019-ish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so things had gotten very bad for an extended period of time, and I was doing some things right. Some good, some bad. I was, coping with alcohol because it made the noise go away and it made
Mm.
the feelings
Hmm.
go away for a short period of time. But I was also trying to, I was working out. I was trying to do things, but hadn't really dug deep into the brain health stuff because I didn't know that's what it was. And so finally, when I got that brain scan, right, it was a time with my workers' comp case through the league, and the doctors are saying all these symptoms you're talking about, like we need to get a brain scan. And so that
Mm.
was the educational moment for me when they pulled that scan up and showed me the damage that there was and explained how those areas of damage affected my mood and all these other things. So to me, it was kind of an aha moment, like, oh, hey, I'm not crazy, and there's a reason, right? There's much more damage than I thought there was or would be,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so that's when I had to decide what I was going to do moving forward.
Wow. And, during that time from 2012 till you got the brain scan, when you would have these moments of rage, obviously you were saying you could tell that like this isn't right, but were the people around you, family or friends, if they were to see that, would they, I mean, did they realize something was off, or were this just more like, because, with as men, we get to be angry and we get to like celebrate. And those are kind of the two things we get to do
Yep.
that are accepted immediately. We're all trying to change that, hopefully, but certainly then that was kind of the thing. So I'm wondering, did the people around you, did they just kind of write it off as like, oh, he's a football player, of course he's going to have rage and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the people very close to me, specifically my wife and kids, they knew. She knew something was going on,
Mm.
and the fact is, I was never a super social guy. We
Mm.
never went out a lot with other people. The guys on the team, we'd go drink beers after the game, but I was not ever super social. So I think a lot of people just thought I was an angry ex-athlete, right? Because I would
Mm.
not talk to anybody, was kind of, had the growl on my face in the corner, but that was just me dealing with my, the brain fog and the demons, right? Like being in these
Yeah.
places and being anxious. And so my wife, she knew something major was going on, and she was trying to help me, right? There's times where, I remember a conversation I had with her. I went over to my neighbors who I was friends with, but it was 3 nights in 1 week that I came home loaded, right? Ended up throwing up
Mm.
from excessive drinking. And so
And you're a big guy. I mean, it takes a lot for
yeah, and it
you
was a
to
lot. I
throw
mean,
up from.
at those, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, he just for reference, he's 6'7", and when you were playing, you're 325 or something like that.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it was,
you're looking a little more slim
yeah,
now.
about 275 now. But yeah, it was just,
Okay.
stuff in excess. She knew that. And so she knew things
Yeah.
were going on, and she knew, right, when I was, something would happen, and I would lose my shit about it, right? And
Mm.
it shouldn't have triggered me. So then it turned into, as time went on, for her, trying to, jump on those grenades, for a better lack of words, right? Because, we had 3 young kids at this time. And so she's trying
Wow.
to, protect the kids from seeing it, trying to not put me in situations that this would happen, or de-escalate them, right? If they did, and got to
Hmm.
the point where, I'm sitting in a chair in our living room, just in my own head, just rubbing my hands because I was afraid I was going to do something to somebody. And so she knew very well, maybe not to the extent of what was going on in my head with the ideation and all that, but she
Hmm.
knew I was struggling, and she would do everything she could to help me through that, right? Even with being in public, right? She would see something going on and she would get me out of there. Be like, "Hey, time to go. I
Mm.
want to go. I'm tired." Right? She would put it on her so I didn't feel like I was the burden. And so
Yeah.
having her,
I mean, that's a lot of stress for everyone.
absolutely, right? And I look back
Yeah.
on it, and she, thank God I had her, and I knew her since college. We dated in college, so she knew me back when I
Mm.
was, 19 years old. So she was understanding, but also was trying to, survive in her life and raising kids, and deal with what we were going through.
Yeah. So, which, yeah, I mean, again, that's just a lot going on behind the scenes that people just probably never saw, never knew, and just were like, oh, you guys must be fine. Everything's grand. But, so you get the brain scan and you're like, you learn this, like, a lot more damage than you expected. How, how was that for you and your wife? Well, and your whole family, but once you realized that, like, what was the reaction?
The reaction for me was not what you expect. So we're sitting with a neurologist, and he's going over this, has a healthy brain up, has my brain up. And, my wife instantly was crying, right? Tears running down her
Mm.
face, just seeing it. I mean, it was shocking. And I started laughing, and she looked at me, and she said, "What the fuck are you laughing about?" Right. And I just turned, I said, "I'm not crazy. That's why I'm laughing, because I thought I was going crazy, and there's a reason this is happening." So,
Yeah.
that initial shock was like, holy cow. But then I remember instantly kicking into, because I'm all or nothing, like a lot of athletes are. So,
Hmm.
whether it's drinking or whether it's taking care of yourself. So, in that instance, I remember talking to the neurologist, like, "Hey, so what does this mean?" Right? I'm sure you've seen a lot of brains in athletes. Is this bad? Is this, on the lower end of what you've seen? And he told me, he's like, "This is, I've seen worse, but this is pretty bad. Like, this is up there with the worst ones I've seen as far as the damage you have at your age."
Wow.
And
Wow.
so, that just led me to, again, all or nothing. I'm like, okay, well, what can we do? And, or what happens from here? Right. I said, don't give me the doctor BS, doctor talk, right? Be honest with me. What does this mean? And what happens from here? And he said, the reality is, if you don't do anything to change things in your life, and do certain things, the reality is you'll probably be a statistic, and I knew what that meant, that because we were talking CTE, we're talking
Yep.
all these things, right? And that usually leads
I
down the
mean,
road to
Junior
suicide.
Seau comes to mind.
Exactly.
Um,
Uh,
there's endurance athletes that come to mind for me. Yeah.
Yep. And
Yep.
so, hearing that, right. And, and I'm in work mode now, right? I'm like, okay, well, tell me what's going on. My wife's, obviously upset and just trying to absorb all this. And so we talked, and I said, okay, well, what do I need to do? And, we started going through stuff. He's like, you need to stop drinking, right? That alcohol is the worst thing in the world for your brain. So, okay, I'll try and do that, right? And then, let's get you into this brain specialist. Let's get your hormones checked out. So it went down this rabbit hole of doing different things, right? They told me I was a guy that should try a hyperbaric chamber. They've had good results with that. So I did a hyperbaric chamber. I rented one, and I was in it 2 hours a day for a month. Felt,
Wow.
a little bit of relief, right? Felt some movement in my
Hmm.
brain. So I
Hmm.
bought one. Luckily, through my retirement from the NFL, I was able to put some money towards, and I bought my own hyperbaric chamber. And I'm doing light therapy, and I'm doing, blood tests weekly to test, because my hormones were all over the place, and
Wow.
testosterone was low, and cortisol was through the roof. And so all these things. And so for the next year and a half, I went all in on doing everything I could that they threw at me, right? If they told me to do it,
Yeah.
or if it made sense, I'd buy it. And I was doing, that was my life, because I was like, I want to be better, right? I want to be here.
Yeah.
And
A
so,
new regiment that you could like really focus on. And I just want to say, like, you know, from what I'm hearing is like you had this huge moment of relief to the point where you laughed and then, which is amazing. And then you're just immediately like, you don't strike me. I mean, I've only known you here 20 minutes, but you don't strike me as someone who, you know, is going to complain or like bitch about it. Like you're just like, okay, what are we going to do? Like you're going to like focus in and try and fix it. And cause that's just the next step, right? It's the next logical step. And you're doing all these things a year and a half in, and then a little better. But, you know, what is it? I assume your wife is like come around and she's also supporting you. And is there a moment a year and a half in where something else like clicks that the next step?
Yeah, it was. So during that time, right, I was minimally better. And I was getting tired. I remember telling her, I was like, I don't do this anymore. Like I'm doing all this. I don't feel any better. A little bit, I got my sleep to improve. I had minimal improvements, but I remember having that conversation. Said, I'm tired. There's days I don't want to do this. And at that point, I was listening to a lot of military podcasts, right? Podcasts became hot. I found relief in, some of these military podcasts. Specifically, I was listening to the Team Never Quit with Marcus Luttrell. And,
Yep.
Hearing these never quit stories, right? So it brought me hope. It was like I'd hear these stories and I'd hear about alcoholism and depression and TBI and all these things that related to me. And then I'd hear about their never quit moment and how they got through it. And so listening to those, I think there was 150 or 175 episodes at that point. I listened to every single one, right? Because I just got, again, it was like all in. So every time I was in the car, I'm listening. And it came to a point I was driving up to our cabin before we lived here full time in the lake. And Marcus Capone and Amber Capone were on there talking about their journey. And so that was kind of the next step, right? I hear this guy talking. I hear Marcus talking about, being a college football player, being a Navy SEAL, TBI, the brain blast, all these things, and his, alcohol addiction. And I'm like, I called my wife and was like, man, I'm talking on this podcast. This is literally me.
Wow.
And she's,
I mean, that just gives goosebumps really to be like, it's reflecting your story so accurately.
Yeah. And I remember
somebody else. Yeah.
I remember cause she was home with our kids and she's, I'm sure trying to get kids to bed and deal with 3 young kids. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, no, listen, you got to listen. It's me. Right. And so I listened to the rest of his story, right? What he did, his healing through psychedelic assisted therapy with Ibogaine, the foundation they started, Vets, right? And I got to our cabin that night and I looked up their website and I'm like, I want to try an email, right? This is hope. Gave me hope. And so I emailed their website thinking they won't get back to me. And then I told my wife, like, hey, you got to listen to the whole thing. And so the next day she did. She called me, crying. She's like, it does sound like you, on there. And then that day, Marcus and Amber's people called me. And then I was on the phone with Marcus and Amber themselves. And that's what started the next step of my healing was them calling me and then telling my story to them, talking through what he'd been through and what they were doing. And then that's, kind of what the saving grace was for me.
Wow. So then, I think like 3 weeks later, you were down doing Ibogaine.
Yeah. So Marcus.
And this is, you're from a small town in Iowa, Masonville, population of like 100 people, grew up on a farm. I'm sure you did not see this when you were out, as a kid on the farm, that this was going to be your path or that you would be in Mexico doing this psychedelic, in the US illegal substance. Was there any like, what the hell am I doing sort of moment as you were like preparing to go down there?
Yeah, there was. I think there was more feeling for me of like, I need this to work. So I got to believe in this, right? I had never done any psychedelics. I barely, tried marijuana, right? Just wasn't my thing. So I knew nothing about it. But for me, it was hope. I had heard his story. I believed him. I believed the people he put me in contact with. And I had to believe because I told my wife, right? Like I wasn't scared. The day before I left, I was, we worked out and I was just crying on the front steps. And she's like, are you scared? And I'm like, I'm scared it's not going to work. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there were absolutely. I called my parents and told them, hey, this is what I'm doing. I don't want your opinion. But this is where I'm going. I just want to tell you I love you. Because if I don't come back, right? Because I was scared. Like, am I going to go
Mm-hmm.
die? Like, what am I? Where am I
Yep.
really going? And so there was absolutely some emotion of being scared, but I think it was more so scared of it not working and where that would lead to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's just interesting because, we've had these different paths, yet there's so many similarities, which I think is true to so much about life between people. Cause like I went and I did ayahuasca in 2006 for the first time before people were even talking about psychedelic stuff. And I was like in this very dark period of my life. And like, if it doesn't work, I don't know what my next step is. I don't know if I'm going to go down there and go crazy. I called my parents. I'm like, I'm doing this. And they're all like, you shouldn't do that, yeah, it's just putting that out there that there's can be incredible connections with people who you've just met. But so yeah, you go and Ibogaine again. If you've listened to this podcast, like it's certainly like the biggest, like most potential for things to go wrong of any of the psychedelics. There's someone else I had on the podcast whose brother did it. I think he might have done Iboga though, the actual root, not
Yep.
the derivative, which Ibogaine is, who ended up in a coma, is now in a vegetative state.
Oh,
And the place he did it was obviously not taking the care that the place in Mexico does, which I know they hook you up to heart monitors and they do all sorts of rigorous tests. So as you're going into this, I mean, do they like sit with you? Is there like, do they like figure out what your intention is? What is the preamble to the actual experience?
yeah. So, like you said, I mean, this medicine can have effects on you, right? And they've come a long way with that, right? They do magnesium drip for the heart risk, right? They have that stuff dialed in. If you're in a facility, right, that's doing it, like we said, with doctors and EKGs. But before I even went down, right, I met with some of their therapists. Not only are we going through all the medications I'm on, which I had to get off of, so I went cold turkey
Mm,
off of all of those, which is not recommended. Um,
no.
but I wasn't missing this opportunity. So that's something
Yeah.
I did. It greatly affected me in a negative way, but I made it through it. And then so dealing with these therapists, right? They're kind of, because I knew nothing about it, right? They're talking about what the general idea of what happens. So you going into it because you are scared, right? I don't like loss of control. I don't like
Hmm.
that's why I never liked marijuana, because I didn't like how it made me feel. So I don't necessarily like drugs. I've never been that guy. I don't like the uncontrolled feeling. And so they're talking through all this, how you can make it easier, right? As far as going in with intentions of what you want to work on, deal with, but then also just letting go. They kept saying to let the medicine do what it's supposed to do and what it will choose to
Hmm.
do. And so the letting go for me was helpful, because I remember getting in and the medicine started kicking in, and a bad feeling. I was like, I want out of this. I want out of this. And I knew in my head, hey, you got 12
Mm,
more hours to go, buddy. So you might as well relax as
12
much as you
hours.
can and let it
Yeah.
work. And so, yeah, they did a ton of work as we got there. And then when we, got down there, there's some breath work. There's some stuff to get you right. Cause
Hmm.
it is scientific, right? It is a doctor setting, but it's also very spiritual and ceremonial. So writing our
Yeah.
intentions, doing a fire burning ceremony, all those things that live and show what the culture of that medicine is.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing what your intentions were or some of them?
Yeah, the two big ones for me was one, I wanted to love myself. Like, I hated
Mm,
myself, and I knew that I couldn't love anybody else or be good to anyone else if I didn't love myself. And so I was
hmm.
had so much hatred towards myself, whether it was things that I thought were failures or how I acted through this process. And so that was my main one. And the other one was I wanted help with all the symptoms I had, right? I had extreme brain fog, right? The rage stuff, these
Right.
things.
Right.
I was like, I need help with this, because I want to be a good husband and a good father, and I'm not right now. And so I think that
Mm,
some of those effects from the TBI that I knew, right? Those things were my intention. And then just to be proud of myself, right? Be proud of what I had accomplished. And so those were the
hmm.
three main ones for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Which goes back to the loving yourself. And, I think is, a lot of us athletes as well as people who are just kind of high achieving, like it's surprising what I've learned that how many people of those high achievers have a low thought of who they are and, self-hatred or not achieving enough or never doing enough or not, there's always that next run that you could do better.
Yep.
So I love that, just that you brought that up, and I wanted to call that out. So then then you start your first psychedelic journey and you're like, I just got to sit back and I got 12 hours of this, which again, Ibogaine or Iboga is I think the longest lasting psychedelic. Maybe if you took a huge hit of LSD, you might go that long, but it's just normal amount of Iboga, you're going at least 12 hours, which it sounds like you did. I guess, just relate a little bit, because a lot of people are never going to do this. So, a little taste if you can. And I know it's very difficult to put into words, but what is that experience like?
Yeah, I think at first it was just all the, right, my heart was racing, the tingling, the hearing buzzing, like all these different sensations that you hear and feel, right? And then as the medicine kicked in, right, then I'm seeing lights, I'm seeing like, things as, is that real? I'm wondering as my eye mask is down, like, is this thing I'm seeing behind this eye mask, is this real? Am I making this up? And then for me, it was, like you said, the medicine is so heavy. There was a point where it took me in, right? It does to most people. And there's no, like, for me, I've done ayahuasca, I've done psilocybin. To me, you work to stay in that. Those are great medicines also, but Ibogaine, it grabs you and takes you in. And then I'm seeing, seeing myself floating in, like in space is what it seemed like. And all these lights were flashing around. And in this video, in the distance, I could see some sort of like TV screen video playing. And I was wondering what it was. And then as I got closer, it's like this reel of my life and all these experiences I had. And so I'm watching that and thinking, trying to be like, they told me, like, be curious. I'm like, what is that? Right. So I'm seeing these things as they fly by me as I'm floating in space. And I'm grabbing them out of this video, like, reel. And I'd grab them and throw them back out into the universe if I didn't want them. Right. It was like the defragging part. They talked about that before, defragging the brain. And I'm like, I'm gonna get that out of here. Right. All this negative crap, stuff I saw negative. And then there's things I kept, right. I threw it towards my heart. And so that was for me, and it's different for everyone, but that was the that seemed like that went on for hours and hours. And I think it did in real time. And that was kind of my experience and experiences later, when I ended up going back and doing it again.
Yeah. Well, and that both your experience about, the sort of like these films or images from your life coming up, as well as, you mentioned Marcus Capone, and he is kind of the central figure in the documentary In Waves and War, which is on Netflix. Highly recommend that. And, a lot of those guys had a similar thing where it's like you're seeing these moments of your life come and you either take them or throw them out. And, on one hand, to me, there's something about that reminds me of the stories you hear when someone like flatlines and then comes back to life. Like your life flashes before your eyes, right? Sort of thing. And just pointing that out because I think it's a very interesting coincidence that there's a similarity there. And then also, with In Waves and War, certainly those guys were going and dealing with what they experienced in war and PTSD. But, also with each of them, it seemed like I was surprised, and a little spoiler alert here, but it seemed like many of them, if not all of them, like there's always some like younger childhood situation that came up. And I guess you don't have to share what it was if it did come up, but I'm wondering if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, not really for me. You do see that in a lot of veterans, and not my experience, right? I grew up in a family. I had 4 siblings. My parents are married and are still married. We're married and still married, had a good relationship. My parents were tough. They were strict. But I didn't have any major childhood trauma come up. Yes. Were we driven as a family? Was there strict consequences if something? Yes. But stuff that I relived, but not necessarily thought was a huge burden on me. And so, but
Yeah,
you also, like with a lot of military guys, right, come from situations like this, right? So I think if you talk to a lot of them, because they had that, and they saw that it was those instances rather than the things they did in war, right? And so luckily for me, I guess I didn't have much of that. Was there certain things? Of course, right? We all have things you change about how you were raised or what happened, or
of course. Yeah,
but there was nothing major like that for me, like you see in those guys in Waves and More. And I think that's, it depends on the person and the situation that they've lived through. And so
yeah.
luckily for me, I didn't have that burden hanging on me.
That's awesome. Would you mind sharing like an example of something you would have thrown away during that first trip, or given to the universe, and something you kept?
Yeah. So I think a lot of my, PTSD was from, failure in my mind, right? Because,
Mm,
right, you never achieve enough, right? I'd gone through college, went from a nobody to the winning the Outland Trophy for the top interior or, interior lineman on either side of the ball, right? So the best in the country on either side of the ball at my position, or five positions, at 10
yeah.
positions by playing offense and defense. So, that's what I did. I worked and worked and worked, and I achieved that. I was in a great situation. And so some of mine was, right, I go to, right, it was a super high draft pick, go to a team that obviously the teams with the worst records have the highest draft picks. And
Right.
unfortunately, things never really got turned around when I was with the Raiders, right? So we were never in a spot to try and make it to the playoffs or play in a playoff game. So stuff that, may seem crazy to some people, that's super important in what we do, right? You play this game to achieve those things.
Yeah,
We all
that's why you're there.
exactly, right. You're getting paid to do that. You achieve individual success from a team being good. That's any team sport, right? So you to be good as a team, right? That's why I was successful in Iowa, right? We had a team that built up, great team. It's easier to be
Hmm.
successful when things are going really good around you, and so some of those instances were just some of those, right? Sitting there at the time of the Super Bowl, the playoffs, sitting in my house watching TV and watching my friends play on TV, right? And as minute as that seemed, it was a huge thing for me. It was a huge trigger, right?
Yeah.
So that was one of them, grabbing and like, get that. I don't want to watch it, because I would get triggered. Like if my son would turn on the playoff games when playoffs and Super Bowl came around, like to rage, right? Because then it
Yeah.
leads back to failure and all these things. And so there's a lot of instances like that. Even, things I didn't, right? As an athlete, you relive, had so many great high moments, even in college, but there was, plays in games that I remembered, right? Had the greatest game of my life besides one play. And that's the
Mm,
only thing I remembered. I remember throwing that away,
the
right?
one play.
Yeah, it was the
Oh
one play where,
gosh.
right,
Yep.
I had made
Yep.
another play in that
Uh,
game that, scouts and coaches told me, like, this is where you made your money, because I chased a guy down on an interception, jumped through two guys and made the tackle. But that I didn't remember that. I remembered the holding call I
mm,
had, so
I hear that. Yeah.
as an athlete, it was a lot of that stuff. And then for me, the stuff I kept was, stuff with my wife and kids and my family, right? I remember my, kids being born, the different things like that. Is like, oh, this stuff that I wasn't enjoying at the time, before
Hmm.
before medicine, because I had all the stuff going on in my head. But the joy of having children and a loving wife that I, enjoyed being around and doing stuff together like that. Those are the things that I kept,
Mm,
because that's the stuff that truly made me happy.
wow. Beautiful. And getting back to, and makes total sense that that's what you want to hold on to, right? But also giving you that new perspective of why, and oh wow, I really do need to cherish this.
Exactly.
Um, getting back to the ceremonies, I know at the end of, after a Ibogaine ceremony, there's like sort of a gray day where basically you've really spent yourself probably more than any way you've ever felt before. And then at least at the place you went to, they then do 5-MeO DMT, which is, some people, it's comes from various plants. Also the Sonora desert toad, it's in their venom.
Yep.
And and it's something I think you usually smoke.
Yes.
But what were those? How was those two like parts of that experience for you the first time?
I think that to me, and that's obviously why this facility does it. They see how they work together. So the Ibogaine
Mm.
broke me down. I mean, I felt terrible, nauseous, throwing up the next day. Couldn't move my legs for most of the day. I couldn't get my
You're like, what have I just done to
exactly.
myself?
Yeah, so I didn't have time to
Yeah.
really think of the experience because I felt so deathly sick. And then when we did the
Hmm.
5-MeO DMT, for me and for the reason I do it, like it turned the lights back on. I flip the breaker, back on, and I remember coming out of it
Mm.
so awake. But in my experience, and it was very profound, and every time I've done it's been very profound. Was that
Mm.
initial experience was they say you die, right? There's things that they had taught us before or told us beforehand, like you can have an ego loss, a lot of people experience death, and I did, right? I went to the white, but it's very peaceful. Like I was like, oh,
Mm.
this is it. This is what killed me. But it was the peaceful, what I envisioned from my upbringing, what death would be, right? I went up to the white light
Mm.
and then I'm like, well, is this it? And then, God appeared, right? Like my God, from my beliefs and how I grew up. And I remember standing there like, man, am I going to get in? Like, am I going to heaven? And then
Yeah, yeah.
I started screaming at him and telling him I'm a failure and a piece of shit and to send me to hell.
Mm.
Right. So in that moment, I still didn't believe that I um, belong there. And then, so I'm screaming at him and then he's like, you belong, you need to talk to her, and pointed behind him. And then my wife appeared. Right. And I'm saying the same thing to her. I'm a terrible husband. I'm a terrible father. You're
Mm.
better off without me. All the things that I thought going into this before medicine. And then there was this huge burden lifted, and I was so peaceful. And I didn't know in the moment, but it was a ego loss. But I remember just belonging and just felt so loved and so happy to
Mm.
be around my wife. And just everything about it changed. And then I remember coming out of it, opened my eyes. And I'm like, oh man, am I dead or am I here back on Earth? And instantly for me, everything was different. Like not only was I super awake, but I could hear everything. Pre-medicine, I had, ringing in my ears, brain fog. Like it was a struggle daily. And I
Mm.
remember hearing everything, right? The ocean
Wow.
was like 2 miles away and I could hear the waves crashing. So it was kind of scary because everything was so intense, right? I could hear the grass. We were laying out in the grass for the ceremony. I could hear the grass blowing in the wind. And so, right,
Wow.
it literally was a new lease on life. And then remember, sitting out there a bit, they talked to you. Then I went back in the group and I just remember being so excited to see the guys I was doing treatment with. And I said it, my exact words were like, I'm back, bitches, because I was, and it was like, I could see it in everybody's eyes. And so from that time forward, not only did that experience stay in my mind, new thought process, but the clarity in that stuff, just, even when I got home, like all of that stuff stayed. And it was just
Mm.
amazing what that medicine had done.
What was it like sharing that 5-MeO experience when your wife showed up, seeing her in that experience, and then sharing that with your wife in real life?
When you come out of the medicine, if you've done it and you get back and you're talking to other people, right, you can see like I remember seeing her face like no way. I mean, I know she believed me, but just the surprise on their face, like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? So I remember that initial, right? I'm explaining all this and I'm super excited and happy and right, my eyes are wide open and she's like, hadn't seen that in a while, in a very long time. And so I remember her being like kind of skeptical, right? And be like, I
Yeah.
believe you. It's just,
Is
you
this
gotta
for
understand, it's
real?
hard to hear or, it's hard to comprehend. Uh, but she could see as time went on the changes and how I was different. So I think uh, as that went on, she, not that she didn't believe it, but even now, right? There's times she's like, I want to
Mhm.
experience this. Years later, she's like, I want to experience it because I believe what you're saying, but it's just so hard to comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I similar with my wife when I came back from ayahuasca the first time. She's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, yeah." And then she didn't do it for till like 12 years later. So, yeah, it shows up when it shows up for
Yeah.
each person. Um, and what, you know, I have a feeling like perhaps a lot of people have asked you, "Oh, how do you feel it's changed you since doing it 3 times?" Um, I'm kind of interested in how do you feel like your wife would say it's changed you or your kids?
Yeah, I think she would tell you, and that's why I tell people, ask her if you want to know about Ibogaine and what it does. Talk to the
Mm,
spouse, right? Because she knew me, and she even says it to me, right? I'll get anxious or I'll get upset and raise my voice at my kids. An instance, it was a couple years ago with my son. We were crossing the road to go to the marina to go out in our boat, and he, as a young kid, took off to go across the street, and I grabbed him by the back of the sweatshirt and yanked him back off the road because I saw a truck coming, right? And
yeah.
then I raised my voice and I, you know, got into him a little bit. And I remember after that just sinking because I'm like, oh man, the old Robert's back. And she's like, no, that's normal. That's a normal
That's
reaction.
normal good parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she would tell you, right? She remembers the dark times in this and how bad I was because she
Mm,
talks about those instances and be like, no, that's normal. What's not normal is what you used to do. And she's like, do you remember when, I wouldn't let you take the kids, right? I made it look like I wanted to do it, but first of all, I didn't know if you would get there and remember where to go. And I didn't know what kind of reaction you would have around other people. And so she's the one now that she told me and has told me reminds me all the time. She's like, I have a partner back, right? She said the
mm.
greatest achievement of this in that moment was the day that I got on the app for the kids' sports and checked them in if they were going to practice or not, because she had to do everything, right? I had either not remember to or couldn't handle it, right? Couldn't handle anything.
Wow.
And so she's like having a partner back to do all these things, right? She can take off and go back to Michigan and see her family for a week, and she's not worried about what's going to happen at
What a
home.
gift.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest thing for her is having a life partner back in the old Robert, versions of the old young Robert before all these things went into effect. And for my kids, it's, they were young when I was going through this. Now they're 16, 14, and 11, right? But they make comments too, is like, dad's just so happy now, right?
Oh,
Because it was
wow.
always dealing with demons, and they're like, they're not afraid to come talk to me about things. Before, they were afraid because it was, if it was the wrong thing brought up, like I would get into them in a very negative way. And so, hearing them say that, and then some of the conversations we have and talking about
Mm,
feelings and how things make you feel. And I've told that to them. Hey, when you say it this way, it makes me feel this way. And they're like, man, you would never do that before. You wouldn't even let us talk. So I think that would be the biggest thing for my wife and kids.
yeah. I mean, well, and that's such a big shift. I think, uh, as at the end, you're saying, like, if you say this, it makes me feel that way. Like, just as parents in general, and particularly as men, like, that isn't like in our generation, your generation, my generation, like that was not common. And so to be able to make that huge shift, and I've heard you speak on another podcast about, breaking the generational trauma around that, about not really allowing people to openly share feelings and how something affects you. So I just, give you a huge pat on the back for bringing your kids to that,
Yeah.
or bringing that to your kids.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it is, right? And I told someone once, I started the generational trauma in my family, right? Like that.
Mm,
And it wasn't my fault, right? It still affects
yeah.
me because of my TBI, all the stuff from the TBI, all those things I went through, right? There was trauma. And so trying to rebuild that and talking to them, right? My kids are old enough now that I can talk to them openly about what happened, right? It's not fun. It's not comfortable telling them these thoughts I had, right? Or the fact
Yeah.
that I thought I should take my life because they would be better off without me. But they can understand now why I do what I do, why I'm so dialed in on taking care of myself and our family being calm and kind and all these things,
Mm,
right? Because they understand how bad things were and why those things happened.
yeah. Well, and then in turn, it's giving you all a deeper connection with each other. And, often kids, it's natural for them not to trust their parents at some point, but by being so open and forthcoming, on some level, they're going to have a deeper trust in you and being with you and communicating with you.
Absolutely. And it's as simple
And
as
who doesn't want that?
right, exactly. And as simple as growing up, right? Everyone had their opinion or their thoughts on what suicide was, right? And that's a big one I've
Hmm.
talked to with my older kids is, it's selfish, it's this, it's that. Well, until you've been in that place, right? I didn't want
Hmm.
to kill myself, but I wanted the noise to stop, right? And when
Yeah.
you think you're a burden on other people and you truly believe that, I only thought there was one way to make that happen, but I can talk to
Yep.
them about that now. One, like you said earlier, don't judge people on how they act, give them some grace, right? Maybe they're having a bad day, because dad used to have a lot of bad days, right?
Mm,
So if someone's grumpy or snaps at you or whatever it is, right, have some grace that maybe they got something going on in their life. And then two, with the suicide stuff was, hey, let's be compassionate of words you say to people, or you don't know what they're dealing with, right? And it's not a selfish thing, right? That it's someone that wants these bad thoughts and these things to go away. And so it's something
mhm.
we should talk about before it gets to there, if that, heaven forbid, ever comes into your life.
Yeah. Such an important message. That whole, what you just said, all of that around suicide. Yeah. So thank you for putting that out there. Gosh, I have so many more questions I want to ask, but going to try and just ask a couple more here. After these 3 Ibogaine experiences, at 5-MeO experiences, sounds like you've sat with ayahuasca and psilocybin as well. Has your relationship or outlook on death changed?
It has. I didn't really, it was always, for me, it was always a guess before. What happens when you die? Where, it was this,
Yeah.
pre, all the dark stuff. And then, obviously getting into, the dark days and the suicidal ideation and all that stuff, that I thought that was the answer. I know now from these experiences that is not the answer, right? The worst
Mhm.
version of current me is still the best thing for my kids, rather than me being gone, right? So I know that no
Mm.
matter how bad it gets or could get, right? Like, no, you need to be here for your kids. Because in my second 5 experience, I saw that I killed myself, and I saw what it did to my family, right? And that will never, I mean,
Oh, wow.
that's ingrained in my brain. I saw how it
Whoa,
ruined
that
their,
gives me goosebumps.
yes, it
Yeah.
was one of the most impactful things I've ever been a part of. And so now, it's knowing all that death to me, and with the 5 experiences, like, I'm not afraid of it. I mean, I don't want it to come soon, right? To me, it was
Right.
it was a,
Right.
yeah, it was a peaceful thing, like it should be, right? So it took that question out of my head, but it also gave me, wanting to live my life the best I could, whether I live to be 70 or 100, whatever it is, right? Before it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I have these problems. I'm probably going to be a statistic, right? Or I'm going to be one of those
Yeah.
guys that in their 60s can't remember anything. So now it's just like, hey, it, it will come when it's supposed to come. And I'm not scared I'm not scared of dying. I'm excited to be living and doing everything
Mm.
I can in the moment.
I love that. I love that. Well, and speaking of doing everything you can in the moment, let's talk a little bit about the nonprofit you started, co-founded, Athletes for Care. What is that all about? Why did you start it? What are you wanting to achieve with that?
I think that the main reason I started it is because I become very, very close with Marcus and Amber Capone. They took the phone call when I reached out to their foundation. Obviously,
Mm.
they've become very close friends. But I've seen what they've done for their community, and as after my healing, right, wasn't just once, right? I went back the second time, and it really took 2 for me, and I ended up going a third time just for growth. But when I started talking about my story, right? Because again, it got me through, like, hey, you're not a coward. You're not these things that I thought I was, because I had these feelings and thoughts. So I started talking to my friends and old teammates and people, and so many other people had similar stories that they weren't telling anybody about. So
Mm.
I saw
Mhm.
the healing power of this medicine, what it did for me, saved my life, changed my life. And so I wanted to help others. And so seeing what Marcus and Amber did with their organization, and how the veteran community has bought in, right, and understands it, the athlete community needs that, not just football, right? We're talking to a ton of NHL guys. We're talking to MMA, soccer
Yeah.
players, right? Men, women, you name it. There's a lot of issues from sport. And so
Yeah.
that's why I co-founded Athletes for Care, because I want to give people those options. I didn't know about this option, right? There's plenty of people like me who are doing everything they can within, what we know is the modern medical system, and they're getting no relief. And I talk to these guys weekly, right? A
Mm.
guy every day that's in the same spot I was. So
Wow.
the main reason was to give them hope and give them other options. Not saying it's for everyone, not saying it fixes everything, It's not a magic pill, but here's another option because I went through everything
Mhm.
else. And so not only
Is
that,
it mainly Ibogaine or just plant medicine in general, or are you also presenting other, like, oh, there's therapy and the more traditional stuff as well?
absolutely, it's everything, right? It's
Okay.
all things mental health. Yes, I believe in all psychedelics. But from my experience, because of the power of it, obviously I'm more laser focused on Ibogaine and it's non-recreational. All these things that we deal
Yeah.
with. In what they've come up with the studies. But yes, it's, I talk to guys about cold tub and, Wim Hof, right? I've told 100 guys to download the Wim Hof app and do his breathing
It's a
stuff.
great app.
Yes,
Yep.
it's awesome, right? Cold tub, all these things. So it's not just psychedelics, but it's, just being the best version of you. And for certain guys, a lot of them in my situation, with the effects of TBI, right? It leads down to the
Hmm.
path of them going and doing Ibogaine. So just building that community, guys that can talk about it, the things I gained from my experience with the veterans, right? With Marcus and being able to sit with another grown man who I know is a badass, but be able to talk about our feelings and tell him I love him and really be that open person that we should be.
Yeah, we need more of that all around, I think, for sure. Um, just a couple questions left, as I said, but one, from when you retired to, I would say, even up until you did Ibogaine, which is basically a decade almost, whether it's in psychology or like the kind of iconic mythologist Joseph Campbell, that there's a whole hero's journey arc there, and a dark night of the soul, and yours happen to be like a decade long, which is a really fucking long time for a dark night of the soul. And if you get through that, you know part of that story is discovering something within yourself that you can bring back to the community around you, something that you didn't know was there or you didn't expect. And I'm wondering what that might have been for you, if there was something.
Yeah, I think it was hey, I'm not a football player, right? Like that's all I was for my whole life. And,
Mm-hmm.
so I had this vision of what people thought of me or what I did or didn't accomplish. And you can't go back.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're done with football, you can't go back, right? A musician can play till he's 80, as bad as he may be, right? But
True.
when you're done with the sport, you're done. So I think it brought for me that, hey, that was just a small time of my life. That's what it showed me. It was great, accomplished a lot. I gained a lot of stuff from it. But someone told me once, like, hey, God wouldn't have put you through this if you couldn't handle it. You were meant to go through this to teach others and to help
Mm,
others. And so now
mm,
I just have so much more, I know I bring so much more to the world, right? Being able to be open about
mm.
this, help other
Yeah.
guys. And to me, it's the healing, right? Sport was great, but now it's like, hey, I want to help guys heal and be the best version of them they can be.
Mm,
And that's, I think, what it brought to me more than anything. And just being thankful for what I went through, no matter how it happened. I'd do it all over again because it brought so much light and joy now to be able to do things
mm.
like this, but then go with my kids and enjoy it, not just be sitting there, right? Not being in the moment. And that's the biggest gift it brought.
Yeah, that's a beautiful gift. I mean, both for your family, your friends, for all these other athletes that you're helping. And, I just want to reflect that, like, earlier in the conversation, especially you said during this dark period, and maybe before, I don't know, but you said, you're usually reserved. You're not a very social person. That's not like you being out, being the center of the party. And yet, here you are, standing up as a resource for people to reach out to. You're on these podcasts talking to people, and, that doesn't sound like it used to be your normal state. Let's just put it that way.
For sure. No, I would never have done
Yeah.
this before healing, right? Let alone that. I
Mm,
mean, we went to my son's musical last night at elementary school, and I was laughing because I was comfortable because normally I'd be sweating or super anxious or angry. And I was talking to people, right? I'm still me. I'm still driven. I still have my
yeah,
values.
yeah,
But it was
of course.
nice conversations with people around us. Didn't make me anxious. I was sitting there cool and calm. And I never had that before. And so to be able to not only do this, right, talk about it, right, I've lived through it. And it's like people talk about suicide. I can sit here and talk about those times and those thoughts I had, and it doesn't
Yeah.
send me into an instant, shock or sweat, right? Because I lived it and I dealt with it. And so there's no anxiety behind it. And I know it's helping people talk about it.
It absolutely is. And thank you for that. Before we get to the last little 3 speed round questions, where can people find out more about Athletes for Care or find out about you or
Yeah,
what have you?
check us out on our website, athletesforcare.org, right? I'm on Instagram. Not that I'm a big social media guy, but I'm on Instagram, official Robert Gallery, and then athletes, the number 4 care on Instagram. You can reach out through our website, emails. So we have a lot of athletes reach out through there. You can donate on there if you want to help this. We're part of some research opportunities too. We're trying to do some research to help advance, early detection of these symptoms. So it's not just for healing of guys, but it's for the education and then the research part of it. So check us out on all those platforms.
That's awesome. Well, and yeah, if you're an athlete out there and going through some dark times or challenging times, don't hesitate to reach out because you are not alone. Definitely want to put an exclamation point on that. Last 3 questions. First one is, I've heard you talk about, what you got out of your first 2 Ibogaine experiences. What is something you learned or gained from that last one when you said it was just for growth?
I think it was that I'd done enough, right? Because I'm still like people ask me like, oh, am I going to lose my drive? Am I going to lose this? Right? It's still, I wasn't addicted, but I'm like, no, more. I'm going to do it more because it's going to make my brain healthier in this. And I remember in that experience, it was very calm. There wasn't much reels in the Ibogaine experience. And I remember the medicine telling me, you've done enough. That's enough. Right. Cause I'm still that guy, do more. Right. I'm all in.
Yeah.
And so that was a big one. And then the other big one with the 5-MeO was, it was just pure bliss and calmness. There was no visuals really, right? I went to the white light. It was just peaceful. And I remember thinking like, wait a minute. Like, it's got to show me something. And I remember coming out of it and we were on, we got back into, back from Mexico into San Diego. And I remember telling the driver, drop me off at the airport. I'm going home because I was supposed to stay a night. And I was like, nope, it's time to go home. So that was the big thing for me in the third one. Like, hey, you've got the tools now. You don't need to, right? You don't need to come back and do this again. Never say never, but that was the biggest thing for me. Like, you have the tools to handle this, and look how peaceful and calm you were throughout all of this.
Wow. That's amazing. And, it brings to mind, not maybe it'll call you back at some point, but I remember, I feel like Alan Watts said, once you get the message, hang up the phone.
Yep.
So it sounds like you've hung up the phone for a while.
It is, right? Now the things like this help me, right? That's helping others, right?
Yeah.
Talking about it and being open about it. And that quote puts it very well.
Yeah. Amazing. Second question, what is something you've had to that you've lost or had to let go of in the last year or 2 that, and this could be good or bad, that has taught you something?
I think the biggest one that comes to mind is my oldest daughter, about a year and a half ago, tore her ACL during her club basketball team. And so that brought me back to my days and my injuries and dealing with, not being a part of the team and going through the rehab. And I got 6-7 months in. I remember, getting on her case like, hey, no one cares that you blew your knee out, right? You got to work, you got to rehab, you got to, like, as much as you want people to, if you want people to feel bad for you, whatever it is, like, no one cares, right? And I was so back in that mindset of just work harder, like, you can't be sad, you can't be this. And then there was an instance, I actually went and did ayahuasca, just a retreat. I was in a good place, but I was like, hey, I need some growth. And it just happened to be during this time. And I saw that I wasn't letting her feel the pain of what she went through. Right. I saw her as this infant child going through this major thing in life. And I'm trying to treat her like she's 45 years old. And I remember coming home, getting home, flying back, and we talked till 1-2 in the morning. And I was just like, you got to feel what it is. And so that was a very eye-opening thing. It made me feel bad because I was down her throat about, like, work harder, do more. Like, you want to get back. No one cares. You can't just sit here and be sad. And so that experience, reopened those pathways for me to be like, hey, we have to feel all of this stuff. And especially a teenage girl.
Yeah. Yeah. So letting go of that, just driving forward and adding in, also recognizing, like, you're going through a whole shitload and it's a lot and it's hard to deal with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Last question. What are you loving right now and why?
What am I loving? I think the thing I love the most is right. So I've started this foundation. We have in your mind. I'm still driven. Right. I should do this. I want to do this. I got being around my family. Right. This whole thing has showed me like my kids are only here so long. Right. My
Mm-hmm.
oldest is a sophomore in high school. In 2 years, she's gone. She's going to be off to
Yeah.
college and doing her thing. So I'm loving being in the moment. I'm loving. Right. We drive to an hour away 4 to 5 nights a week for our kids to play on a club team because they want to do it, not because I want them to do it. And people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you do that. I wouldn't do it. And I love it. Right. Yes. Is it stressful and is it a lot? But it's time with our kids. It's something they love to
Yeah.
do. So just being a part of their lives. And then like you said, we live in the mountains, right? 2 nights ago, I took my girls out on the boat at 5 o'clock. We went for a cruise because they didn't have anything, went out and went swimming. Right. And those moments, right, before I was like, we got to do this. We got to get ready for school. We should be doing this. And those things are so meaningful now that it's stuff I love most about this time of my life.
It's so simple yet so like what the special memories of your life are going to be made of, and the special moments between you and your family.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Beautiful. Well, again, Robert, thank you so much for your time and for being so open and willing to talk about all of your experience. That's kind of the whole point for this podcast. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I know the listeners do too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Yeah. So check out athletesforcure.org and yeah, we'll just help someone when they reach out, because someone did for me and it's such a big deal.
Exactly. And that is the perfect note to end on. Thanks again.
Thank you.